Pack your things. Those 3 words echoed through the sterile conference room. Delivered by a woman half my age wearing designer scrubs that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Dr. Ashley Montgomery sat across from me like she was chairing a board meeting. Not destroying someone's career. I'm Dr. Sarah Lynn, 53 years old. Been developing pharmaceutical compounds since Ashley was learning the periodic table in high school. Scientific enough to claim authority. Fashionable enough for investor presentations. Her hair was styled in that Instagram-perfect messy bun. The kind that looks effortless but requires 30 minutes and multiple products. Designer glasses with clear lenses. No prescription. Just aesthetic. Fashion accessory masquerading as scientific credibility. She had the kind of face that photographed extremely well for biotech investor decks. Smooth skin, courtesy of dermatology and chemical peels. Perfect teeth from expensive orthodontics and professional whitening. Makeup applied with influencer precision. The confident, bright smile of someone who'd never watched a patient die because a drug didn't work. Because she'd never gotten a drug far enough to have patience. But her eyes told the real story. Sharp, hard, constantly calculating. When she looked at people, she wasn't seeing scientists or colleagues or contributors. She was seeing cost centers, budget line items, resources to be optimized or eliminated. Her first week, she scheduled what she pompously called a research portfolio optimization summit, mandatory attendance for all senior scientists, principal investigators, department heads, anyone with more than 5 years tenure. I showed up with 19 years of documentation, clinical trial results showing Cardiaxyl's efficacy, patent filings demonstrating innovation, revenue reports proving commercial success, patient testimonials describing lives saved. When I walked into the main conference room, Ashley was already there, already presenting, laptop connected to the projector, slides full of colorful graphs and trendy buzzwords. The kind of presentation that looks impressive to non-scientists, but says nothing of substance. Team, she said, her voice projecting that particular brand of confidence that comes from an MBA and 0 clinical experience. BioNova is at a critical juncture in our organizational evolution. We've had success with first-generation small molecule compounds. That's admirable. Historical. But the future of pharmaceutical development is in gene therapy, CRISPR-based interventions, mRNA platforms, personalized medicine. We need to pivot decisively away from traditional small molecule research. That's 20th century thinking in a 21st century market. I sat in the back row, watching, listening, taking notes. Her slides showed cost comparisons, small molecule research expensive, long timelines, regulatory burden, time to market 7 to 12 years minimum, success rate historically low, return on investment unpredictable, gene therapy research expensive, uncertain timelines, regulatory questions, time to market unknown, success rate undefined, return on investment potentially revolutionary. The data was meaningless, comparing proven methodologies to speculative technologies. But it sounded innovative, disruptive, exactly what venture capitalists wanted to hear, exactly what would attract the next funding round. The traditional pharmaceutical development model is fundamentally broken. Ashley continued, pacing now, getting animated, like a TED Talk speaker building to a climax. We spend decades developing compounds that merely treat symptoms, manage conditions, require lifelong patient compliance. That's not healthcare. That's subscription medicine. We should be curing diseases at the genetic level, eliminating root causes, one-time interventions that permanently fix the problem. That's where the future is. That's where the funding is. That's where BioNova needs to be. The junior researchers were nodding. actually nodding enthusiastically, like she'd just revealed the meaning of life. Instead of reciting buzzwords from last month's biotech conference, I raised my hand, slowly, deliberately. Ashley stopped mid-sentence, looked at me with visible irritation. Yes, Sarah. She said my name like a teacher addressing a student who should know better than to interrupt. Cardioxyl generates $2.4 billion in annual revenue, I said calmly, treating 300,000 patients across 48 countries, 91% efficacy rate. It keeps BioNova profitable, funds all other research including gene therapy initiatives. Abandoning proven revenue streams for speculative technology with no clinical track record is how companies go bankrupt, not how they grow. The room went quiet. Several people looked down at their notebooks, uncomfortable with the confrontation. She smiled. That patronizing smile I would come to recognize as her default response to disagreement. I don't speak at medical conferences about innovation. I don't post on social media about disrupting healthcare. I don't have a TED Talk about the future of medicine. I have patents, 18 of them, each one representing years of research that actually saves lives. I'm the chief research scientist at BioNova Pharmaceuticals. That's a polite way of saying I'm the person who spent the last 19 years developing drugs that work. Not marketing presentations, not investor pitches. Sarah, I truly appreciate your historical contributions to this organization. Really, you've done solid work. Cardioxyl is a fine drug. For its time. She paused for effect, effect. Let that sink in. But we're discussing next-generation therapeutics here. CRISPR-based interventions that rewrite genetic code. mRNA platforms that can address multiple conditions. Your work, and I mean this with complete respect, is built on medicinal chemistry that's 40 years old. It's stable, proven, reliable, but stable is another word for stagnant. Proven is another word for predictable. Reliable is another word for boring. Stable is another word for effective. I replied, keeping my voice level, and effectiveness is what patients need, not buzzwords, not investor pitches, drugs that work. That's exactly the mindset we need to evolve beyond, Ashley said, shaking her head sadly, like a teacher disappointed in a promising student. That trade-off mentality, that either-or thinking. We need people who can think bigger, who aren't limited by what's been done before, who can envision what's possible, not just what's probable. She clicked to the next slide. Moved on. Nobody else said anything. They just nodded, took notes, pretended to understand gene therapy concepts they'd never researched, pretended to believe in technologies that hadn't yet proven viable at scale. After the meeting, I went back to my lab, pulled up the licensing agreement I'd signed with Robert Shaw 19 years ago. Section 11, Termination Clause. If BioNova terminated my employment without documented performance failures, the license for Cardioxyl's core compound reverted after 60 days. Let her try. I thought, let her make that catastrophic mistake. The dismantling started subtly. My name disappeared from new patent applications. Research I'd led for 15 years, suddenly credited to the BioNova research team. No individual names. No acknowledgement. The weekly lab meetings I'd been running since 2005 got rescheduled to times when I had FDA compliance reviews. I'd walk past the conference room and see Ashley, surrounded by postdocs who'd been with the company for 6 months, explaining my molecular designs to people who thought structure-activity relationships were something you learned in one semester. I wasn't worried initially. You don't fire the scientist who invented your only profitable drug. That's basic business logic. But the atmosphere was changing. The lab felt different, heavier, more political. Junior researchers stopped asking me questions. The shared calendar developed blocks labeled Strategic Science Review, Leadership only. 4-hour meetings I wasn't invited to. Then I found the email. Left open on a shared computer in the lab. Someone had forgotten to log out. From Ashley to the executive team. Subject, R&D restructuring proposal. Legacy researchers resistant to modern methodologies. Current salary structure untenable, given available alternatives. Recommend transitioning to contract-based research model. Addressing the Lynn situation. Target completion. Q4. The Lynn situation. That was me. I wasn't chief research scientist anymore. I was a problem requiring elimination. I photographed the email with my phone, walked back to my lab, locked the door, opened my personal laptop, not the company machine. I reviewed the licensing agreement. Every clause, every termination provision, every consequence of breach. Try me. Ashley, I whispered to my empty lab, just try me. If you've never worked in pharmaceutical research, let me explain the quiet purge. They don't revoke your lab access immediately. That creates documentation problems, regulatory issues. Instead, they bleed your authority slowly, strip your influence until you're invisible. It started with research approvals. One morning, I submitted a protocol for phase 4 studies on cardioxyl. Additional indications, pediatric applications, denied, budget constraints. The system said, I called Dr. James Park, head of clinical development. We'd worked together for 14 years. He took 3 days to respond. Sarah, I'm sorry. Ashley restructured the approval process. All new protocols require CSO sign-off. She's prioritizing gene therapy initiatives. Small molecule work is deprioritized. Deprioritized. The drug generating $2.4 billion. Deprioritized. The final humiliation came on a Thursday. Ashley called an all-hands research symposium, main auditorium, attendance mandatory. I arrived early, stood near the back, 200 researchers, lab techs, clinical coordinators, the entire R&D organization. Ashley walked to the podium, wireless microphone, actual molecules that bind to actual receptors and cure actual diseases. BioNova's flagship drug, cardioxyl, treats congestive heart failure. I invented it. Not a team, not a department. Me. 12 years of molecular modeling and clinical trials, testing thousands of compounds until I found the one that worked. Cardioxyl generates $2.4 billion in annual revenue. Treats 300,000 patients across 48 countries. Confident posture. The board of directors sat in the front row. Dr. Robert Shaw, our founder, among them, looking uncomfortable but silent. Everyone, thank you for being here, Ashley began. Today marks a transformational moment for BioNova. We're announcing a complete strategic pivot, moving from traditional small molecule development to cutting-edge gene therapy. This positions us at the forefront of 21st century medicine. Applause. Actual applause. Like this was good news. But transformation requires difficult decisions. She continued. The pharmaceutical industry has evolved. Patient expectations have evolved. Investor expectations have evolved. And some members of our team haven't evolved with them. She paused, looked directly at me. Dr. Sarah Lynn, could you please come to the front? The room went silent. 200 people turned. I could hear the ventilation system, someone's pager beeping, the distant sound of centrifuges running in nearby labs. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor. Each step measured, controlled. When I reached the front, Ashley had that look. Victory already claimed. Sarah, your tenure at BioNova has been significant. You developed cardioxyl, a drug that's helped many patients. But our analysis shows your research approach no longer aligns with our strategic direction. Effective immediately. We're terminating your employment. HR will process your final compensation. Security will escort you to collect personal items from your lab. She said it into the microphone, made sure everyone heard. 19 years reduced to a personnel decision. I didn't react, didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. My voice was steady when I spoke. I understand. I said, have you reviewed the licensing agreement for Cardiaxil? What licensing agreement? Ashley asked, confusion flickering across her face. The one I signed with Robert in 2005. The one that grants BioNova exclusive rights to manufacture and market Cardiaxil. The one that automatically terminates if I'm fired without documented performance cause. Ashley's expression shifted. Confusion to irritation. All intellectual property developed during employment belongs to BioNova, she said. Standard pharmaceutical industry practice. Legal reviewed everything. Interesting, I said to him, because Cardiaxil's core molecular structure was developed before I joined BioNova. The licensing agreement predates my employment contract. You might want to double-check with legal. The smile vanished. HR will have your paperwork ready, she said, waving dismissively. Security. Please escort Dr. Lin out. 2 security guards appeared, young, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I turned and walked toward the exit, past the lab benches, past the researchers who suddenly found their shoes fascinating, past the clean rooms where we developed drugs that saved lives. The elevator doors closed. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel, still composed, still in control. Ashley thought it was over. She thought she'd won. I pulled out my phone and texted my attorney. Jennifer, this is Sarah. Execute the termination notice per our agreement. File it with BioNova Legal and the board. Do it now. Jennifer Wu was my intellectual property attorney. We'd been preparing for this possibility since 2005. She knew every clause, every trigger, every remedy. She responded within seconds. Filed. 60-day notice period begins today. Clock is ticking. I walked out of the building into the San Diego sunshine, got in my car, drove home to La Jolla, made tea, and waited. What Ashley didn't know, what nobody at BioNova knew except Jennifer and me, was that Cardiaxil wasn't just a drug. It was the drug. $2.4 billion in annual revenue, 87% of BioNova's total income, 300,000 patients worldwide, all dependent on a molecule I owned. The licensing agreement was explicit. Termination without documented cause triggered automatic license revocation in 60 days. Without Cardiaxil, BioNova had nothing, no revenue, no pipeline, no reason to exist. Just a building full of researchers with no approved products. I sat in my home office and watched my phone. 5 missed calls in the first hour. 12, 25, all from BioNova numbers. I didn't answer. I had research papers to read, green tea to drink, and exactly 59 days, 23 hours before $2.4 billion in revenue disappeared. Let Ashley panic. Let her learn that sometimes the quiet scientist in the corner lab isn't there because she can't compete. Has a 91% efficacy rate? That's not a press release statistic. That's 300,000 people who are alive because of chemistry I did in a lab. And legally, the core compound was mine. See, back in 2005, before BioNova became BioNova, when it was just Dr. or Robert Shaw and 8 researchers in a rented laboratory space, I did something that makes pharmaceutical executives uncomfortable. I retained rights to the base molecular structure. She's there because she owns the foundation. Everything else is built on. The first real call came at hour 9, Dr. Robert Shaw, the founder, the man who'd convinced me to join his startup 19 years ago, who'd promised me respect and recognition. I answered on the sixth ring. Robert. Sarah. His voice was tight, strained. We received a filing from your attorney regarding the Cardioxyl licensing agreement. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said. Ashley fired me in front of the entire research staff. Section 11 of our agreement is very clear. Termination without documented cause revokes the license. Sarah, please, we can fix this. Ashley acted without full information. The board will reinstate you immediately. Chief Scientific Officer position. Ashley's position. 30% salary increase. Whatever you need. I sipped my tea. Robert, I've been expecting this call, but the clock doesn't stop. You have 60 days. 20 minutes later, another call. Patricia Chen, General Counsel at BioNova, the lawyer who'd supposedly reviewed everything. Dr. Lin, this is Patricia Chen. I'm reviewing the documents your attorney filed. There appears to be confusion about intellectual property ownership. Not confusion, I said calmly. Clarity. I developed Cardioxyl's core molecular structure in 2004. Before joining BioNova, the licensing agreement grants manufacturing and marketing rights, not ownership. That agreement terminates when I'm fired without documented performance failures. Silence. Then, Dr. Lin, do you understand what this means? 300,000 patients depend on Cardioxyl, 2.4 billion in revenue, thousands of jobs. I understand perfectly. I also understand that Ashley Montgomery stood in front of 200 researchers, called my work outdated, terminated me to demonstrate her decisiveness. She made a calculation. Now she lives with the result. We can offer enhanced severance, equity, a consulting role. I'm not interested in consulting for people who fire me publicly. You have 60 days to develop an alternative. I suggest you use them wisely. I hung up. The next week unfolded like a slow-motion clinical trial failure I was watching from the control group. My phone became a constant stream of notifications. Texts, emails, voicemails, messages from colleagues, competitors, journalists, headhunters. I ignored most of them, but I couldn't resist reading the messages from people still inside BioNova, the ones sending me real-time updates of the institutional collapse. Day 2, Hour 6, James from Clinical Development. Sarah, you need to see this. Ashley's been locked in the executive conference room for 12 straight hours. She keeps demanding legal find a loophole in your licensing agreement. They keep explaining it's ironclad. She's screaming about paying you off, about invalidating the patents, about suing you for breach of fiduciary duty. Legal keeps shutting her down. HR has received formal complaints about her behavior. Day 2, Hour 14, a forwarded email chain. Someone on the legal team leaked it to me. From Ashley to Patricia Chen and the entire legal department. Subject urgent. Cardioxyl IP crisis. I need immediate analysis of all options to invalidate or circumvent the 2005 licensing agreement. Explore every angle. Contract enforceability under changed circumstances. Patent validity challenges. Antitrust implications of Dr. Lin's actions. Tortious interference. Anything. This is the highest priority issue facing this company. I want options on my desk by end of business today. The response from Patricia Chen, timestamped 2 hours later, was devastating in its brevity. Ashley, I've now reviewed this agreement with 3 external counsel. All concur it's valid and enforceable. Dr. Lin developed the core molecular structure prior to employment. The licensing grant is explicit and unambiguous. Section 11 termination provisions are standard and legal. We have zero basis to challenge ownership. Our only viable path is negotiated settlement. I strongly recommend we begin that process immediately. Day 3, Hour 8. Sarah Mitchell, one of the junior researchers I'd mentored. Dr. Lynn, I'm so sorry for how this happened. Nobody knew about the licensing agreement. Ashley told us in the staff meeting yesterday that legal had confirmed BioNova owned all Cardioxyl IP, that you were just upset about being let go, that you'd signed everything over when you joined. Now we're finding out she either lied or never actually checked. Everyone's updating CVs. BioNova didn't own Cardioxyl's active ingredient. They licensed it. Exclusively. Indefinitely. But if they terminated my employment without documented cause, the license reverted to me after 60 days. They could manufacture the drug, market it worldwide, charge whatever the market would bear. But if they stopped paying royalties or violated our agreement, I could revoke their rights immediately, permanently. Ashley didn't know this. The whole molecular chemistry group is interviewing at competitors. Day 3, Hour 20. Biopharma. News published. Senior research scientist departs. BioNova Pharmaceuticals. Amid leadership changes. The article was carefully worded but devastating. Mentioned my 19-year tenure. Detailed Cardioxyl's importance to BioNova's revenue. Quoted anonymous industry analysts, questioning the timing and wisdom of the termination. Noted that Cardioxyl represented 87% of company revenue, speculated about pipeline instability. Day 4, Hour 6. BioNova stock opened down 18%. By market close, down 23%. Trading volume was 6 times normal. Institutional investors were dumping shares. Day 4, Hour 12. Screenshot from the internal company Slack. A message from Ashley to all research staff. Team, I want to address rumors circulating about recent personnel changes. Dr. Lynn's departure was a strategic decision based on research portfolio optimization. Her contributions are appreciated, but BioNova's future lies in next-generation therapeutics. We remain confident in our capabilities. Our pipeline is strong. Our science is cutting edge. Do not engage with external inquiries. Direct all media requests to communications. Stay focused on our mission. Day 4, Hour 18. The response thread in Slack was leaked to me. Dozens of messages from researchers. Nobody believed Ashley. They were openly discussing her credibility, questioning her competence, sharing job postings from competitors. Day 5, Hour 10. The FDA sent a formal inquiry letter addressed to BioNova's Regulatory Affairs Department. Subject: Cardioxyl manufacturing and supply chain continuity. The letter requested written assurance that manufacturing would continue uninterrupted. Asked it for documentation of all licensing agreements related to active pharmaceutical ingredients. Requested a detailed supply chain contingency plan. Set a 14-day deadline for response. Patient safety concerns were explicitly mentioned. Day 6, Hour 4. 3 major pharmacy chains sent similar letters. CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, all asking for long-term supply guarantees, all noting they'd heard rumors about potential disruptions, all threatening to seek alternative suppliers if guarantees weren't provided. Day 6, Hour 22. Ashley sent an email directly to me. First time she had contacted me since the termination. Subject: Let's talk like adults. Sarah, I think we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. You're a brilliant scientist. I've always respected your work. The termination was a strategic decision, not personal. But you're destroying this company over what amounts to wounded pride. 300,000 patients depend on Cardioxyl. Thousands of employees depend on BioNova. You're better than this petty revenge. Let's find a professional solution. Name your price. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Wounded pride. Ashley had stood on a stage in front of 200 people, called my 19 years of research outdated chemistry, told everyone I was resistant to progress, fired me to demonstrate to the board that she could make tough decisions, make the hard calls, optimize the organization. She had calculated that I would take my severance package, accept retirement gracefully, fade away quietly like every other scientist she'd pushed out. Every single calculation was wrong. Day 8, hour 6, another leaked email from Robert Shaw to the board of directors. Subject, cardiacal crisis. Board action required. I must inform you of a critical situation that requires immediate board intervention. Dr. Sarah Lynn's termination has triggered license termination provisions in our 2005 agreement. Without this license, we cannot legally manufacture or sell Cardiaxol after 60 days. This represents 2.4 billion in annual revenue, 87% of company income, treatment for 300,000 patients worldwide. Legal confirms we have no basis to challenge the agreement. Dr. Montgomery was not aware of the licensing arrangement when she terminated Dr. Lynn. This represents a catastrophic failure of due diligence. I am recommending emergency board meeting. We need to authorize settlement negotiations immediately. Day 10, hour 0, Wall Street Journal, front page. Above the fold, patent dispute. Threatens blockbuster heart failure drug. The article was detailed. Someone had leaked extensively. Probably multiple someones. Or maybe she assumed a 53-year-old scientist wouldn't have the spine to fight. Maybe she thought I'd just take my severance and fade into retirement. She was the new chief scientific officer, brought in by venture capital investors 9 months ago to streamline R&D operations. That's corporate speak for eliminate expensive senior researchers. Replace them with cheaper postdocs who won't question directives, won't push back on unrealistic timelines. The piece explained the licensing agreement, quoted the termination clause, interviewed former BioNova employees who confirmed I developed Cardiaxol's core compound before joining, included statements from patient advocacy groups expressing concern, noted that generic alternatives wouldn't be available for 4 more years. 300,000 patients had no substitute. Day 12, hour 8, the FDA escalated, scheduled mandatory inspection for day 15, supply chain verification, manufacturing capability assessment, patient safety review. Day 14, hour 10, 4 major institutional investors, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, State Street, sent joint letter demanding emergency board meeting, demanding explanation, demanding leadership accountability. Day 16, hour 12, BioNova's chief financial officer resigned, effective immediately. Her resignation letter was leaked within 2 hours. I am resigning due to irreconcilable differences with current executive leadership regarding risk management and fiduciary responsibility. The Cardiaxol situation represents a failure of basic corporate governance that I cannot be associated with. Day 18, hour 6, Ashley was placed on administrative leave. The board announced it, pending investigation into the circumstances surrounding Dr. Lynn's termination. Day 18, hour 14, my phone rang. Robert Shaw. Not a text, not an email, an actual phone call. His voice when I answered was unrecognizable. Sarah, please, we need to talk. Not as CEO to former employee. As someone who's known you for 19 years, who respects what you've built, who's watching everything collapse. What do you want? Robert, I asked. The board met for 7 hours today. We've approved everything you asked for. Everything. Full rights transfer of Cardioxyl and all derivatives. Public acknowledgement of the licensing relationship. Formal written apology. Ashley Montgomery terminated for cause. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Gross negligence. Breach of fiduciary duty. His voice cracked. Paused. I could hear him breathing. Please. We need transition time. 120 days to develop alternatives. Find generic pathways. Transfer patients to other therapies. We're prepared to pay $25 million for temporary license extension, plus consulting fees at $10,000 per hour. We estimate 300 hours of knowledge transfer. What about Ashley? I asked. She's finished, Robert said flatly. Terminated this morning, facing 3 separate lawsuits. Shareholder derivative suit claiming she destroyed billions in company value. Employee class action for negligent misrepresentation that destroyed stock options. And BioNova itself is suing her for breach of fiduciary duty. Potential damages in the hundreds of millions. Her career in biotech is over. No company will hire her. Not for research, not for management, not even for consulting. I let that settle. Ashley Montgomery, the rising star from Boston, the CSO who was going to revolutionize BioNova, now facing lawsuits totaling hundreds of millions. Professional extinction. Reputation destroyed. The settlement is ready. Robert continued. Legal has drafted everything. Jennifer has reviewed it. We can sign today. Please, Sarah. 300,000 patients need Cardioxyl. Send me the documents, I said. I'll review them and get back to you. I hung up. 5 days later, I met Robert at a restaurant in La Jolla. George's at the Cove. Ocean terrace level. Private corner table. The smell of salt air and grilled fish. The sound of waves breaking on the rocks below. Neutral territory. Beautiful and completely removed from the crisis-consuming BioNova. Robert walked in looking like he'd aged 20 years and 3 weeks. His face was drawn, gray. Lines I'd never noticed before carved deep around his eyes and mouth. His suit hung looser than it should, like he'd lost weight from stress. His hand shook slightly when he set his briefcase on the table. He ordered a bourbon. Neat. Double? Didn't wait for me. Just needed something to steady his nerves. You won, he said simply after the drink arrived. No pleasantries. No reminiscing about 19 years of collaboration. Just sliding a thick folder across the linen tablecloth. Complete rights transfer agreement, he continued, his voice rough. Damaged. BioNova Pharmaceuticals releases all claims, rights, title, and interest in Cardioxyl, the base molecular structure, all derivative compounds, all formulations, all manufacturing protocols, all regulatory filings, all clinical trial data. Everything transfers to Sarah Lynn or her designated entity. Won't demand ethical standards. Dr. Ashley Montgomery wasn't promoted from within BioNova. She was imported, installed, parachuted in from a failed biotech startup in Boston called Gene Tech Solutions, a company that had raised $80 million in Series A and B funding, published exactly 0 successful drugs, and shut down 18 months ago after their lead compound failed phase 2 clinical trials, miserably. That's not a track record of success. That's a red flag factory. He paused, took a long drink. Public acknowledgement will be filed with the SEC tomorrow. 8K disclosure. We'll state that Cardioxyl was always licensed technology, that BioNova never owned the core intellectual property, that the license has been terminated due to employment termination without cause, and that we're negotiating a temporary extension while we transition. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. 120 days. Temporary license for $25 million. plus consulting fees at $10,000 per hour. We estimate 300 hours for knowledge transfer, manufacturing process optimization, quality control protocols, regulatory compliance handoff. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Inside were 63 pages of legal documentation. Jennifer had reviewed every word yesterday, sent me her annotations, flagged 3 minor language issues that had been corrected. But I read it all again anyway. Because words matter. Clauses matter. This was 19 years of my life being returned to its rightful owner. It was all there. My molecule, my drug, my patience, my future. Finally, completely, legally mine. And Ashley, I asked without looking up. Robert's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. His knuckles went white around his glass. Then he consciously relaxed, took another drink, set the glass down with exaggerated care. Dr. Ashley Montgomery is no longer with BioNova, he said, each word precise, controlled, terminated for cause on day 18. The official grounds are fraudulent misrepresentation to the board of directors, gross negligence in execution of fiduciary duties, and breach of employment contract. He paused, signaled the waiter for another bourbon. She's facing 3 separate lawsuits right now. The shareholder derivative suit is claiming she destroyed $4 billion in market capitalization through negligent termination decisions. They're seeking $700 million in damages. The employee class action represents 83 BioNova employees whose stock options became worthless. They're arguing her actions constituted gross negligence that directly caused their financial harm. That suit is seeking $200 million, and BioNova itself has filed suit against her. We're claiming she made material misrepresentations about intellectual property ownership, that she assured the board all IP issues were cleared, put that assurance in writing in board presentations, never actually verified the licensing agreement existed. Our damages are the full cost of this crisis, lost market value, legal fees, regulatory penalties, settlement costs. We're seeking $500 million. Robert's second bourbon arrived. He took a drink immediately. There's more, he said quietly. The FDA investigation found she'd been making decisions about research priorities without proper scientific review. Cutting programs based purely on cost. No consideration of clinical viability or patient need. That's triggered a separate regulatory inquiry. Her pharmaceutical license may be suspended. He looked at me with something between respect and fear. Ashley Montgomery's career in biotech is finished. Sarah, completely finished. She'll never work in research again, never manage a lab, never serve on a scientific board. Her name is now permanently associated with one of the most catastrophic leadership failures in pharmaceutical history. I let that information settle. Process? Ashley Montgomery? The confident CSO from Boston? The rising star who was going to transform BioNova? The woman who'd stood on a stage 3 weeks ago and fired me to demonstrate her decisiveness? Now facing lawsuits totaling $1.4 billion. Federal investigation, professional extinction, reputation destroyed beyond recovery. I picked up the pen Robert had brought, Mont Blanc, heavy in my hand, the kind of pen you use for documents that change everything. I signed my name on every required signature line. Slowly, deliberately. Each signature felt significant, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just a legal transfer. This was recognition, vindication, justice. I slid the signed documents back across the table. Pleasure doing business with you. Robert? Robert gathered the papers carefully, reverently almost, like each page was fragile, precious. Before he stood to leave, he looked at me one final time. His expression was complex: regret, respect, exhaustion, maybe even admiration, for what it's worth. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ocean sounds. "I'm sorry. Genuinely sorry." But somehow, Ashley had managed to spin that failure into a promotion, turned a shutdown into a leadership opportunity, convinced BioNova's board that she knew the future of pharmaceutical development, when really, she just knew how to talk the language venture capitalists wanted to hear. She arrived on a Monday morning in October, walking through our San Diego research facility like a celebrity touring a historical site. I should have protected you. Should have questioned Ashley's approach from her first day. Should have verified her claims about IP ownership. Should have remembered that you built this company long before the venture capital, long before the growth plans, long before we became whatever BioNova is now. He paused, looked out at the ocean, at the sunset painting the sky orange and pink. You deserve better than what happened, better than what I allowed to happen. I nodded slowly, acknowledging the apology without accepting it. Some words come too late to repair the damage. Some relationships break beyond fixing. I know. I said, "Well," Robert left, walked out without looking back. I stayed, ordered dinner, sat alone watching the sunset over the Pacific, thinking about 19 years, about molecules and patents, about patients and lives saved, about what had been taken and what I'd just reclaimed. The folder sat on the table, 63 pages of legal language. My life's work returned to me. Official, binding, complete. I finished my meal slowly, savoring it, paid the bill, walked out into the La Jolla evening. The air was cool, clean, smelled like ocean and eucalyptus. People were out, walking dogs, jogging, living their normal lives, unaware that a quiet battle had just concluded, that justice, however expensive, had finally been served. Here's what Robert and Ashley and the entire BioNova board never understood. Even if Ashley hadn't fired me, even if she kept me on staff, she still would have failed. 2 weeks before the termination, I'd filed provisional patents for 3 next-generation compounds, cardiaxyl derivatives with improved efficacy, reduced side effects, broader therapeutic applications. Pharmaceutical compounds don't last forever. Patents expire. Generics emerge. Markets evolve. What works for 19 years won't work indefinitely. The new compounds solve this. Extended therapeutic coverage, improved patient outcomes, addressed markets. Cardiaxyl couldn't touch, all built on my original research. 100% owned by my personal research company. Fully protected, ready for development. Ashley thought she was upgrading BioNova's research portfolio. She was actually destroying the only scientist who understood the science well enough to build the future. While I sat on the actual next generation in my home laboratory, 4 weeks after signing the settlement, I launched my own pharmaceutical company, Lin Biosciences. 6 former BioNova researchers who'd resigned in protest. People I'd mentored for years. People who understood the science, who valued the work over the politics. We started with cardiaxyl under full control, manufacturing partnerships established, distribution agreements signed, revenue flowing immediately. 3 months later, we initiated phase 1 trials on the first derivative compound. Early results were promising, better than cardiaxyl, fewer side effects, broader applications. 6 months after that, we had 2 more compounds in clinical trials. Venture capital came calling. We turned them down. This time, we were building something we owned, completely, without compromise. 1 year later, Lin Biosciences was profitable, growing, expanding research capabilities, filing new patents, building something that would last, something built on respect, on recognition, on the principle that the people who do the science deserve to own what they create. Here's what I learned from this entire experience. The pharmaceutical industry talks constantly about innovation, disruption, next-generation therapeutics, patient-centric care. But the moment someone actually protects their work, refuses to be erased quietly, fights back when wronged, suddenly you're difficult, not a team player, resistant to progress, selfish. What they really want is compliance disguised as innovation. They want you to develop life-saving drugs, pour your expertise into their pipelines, while they own everything and can discard you the moment your salary becomes inconvenient, or your experience makes you expensive, or some ambitious executive wants to demonstrate decisiveness. Ashley Montgomery thought she was optimizing BioNova, streamlining R&D, modernizing the research portfolio, cutting costs, impressing the board with her strategic thinking. What she actually did was prove that some people aren't line items on a budget spreadsheet. They're foundations. Remove the foundation and the entire structure collapses. Immediately, catastrophically. The patents were mine. The drug was mine. The patients followed me. The future was mine. And I was just getting started. Before I go, let me say this. Not a working laboratory where life-saving research happened daily. 31 years old, but carrying herself like she'd personally discovered DNA. She was dressed in what I can only describe as biotech influencer cosplay. Black athleisure leggings under her lab coat, designer sneakers that had never seen the inside of an actual lab, a silk blouse in that particular shade of millennial pink, Apple Watch on one wrist, Cartier bracelet on the other. The contrast was deliberate. If you enjoyed watching corporate arrogance learn an expensive lesson, hit that subscribe button and upvote this post. I need to know that stories about actual justice still matter. In a world drowning in corporate speak and empty innovation promises. Now for the lesson that cost BioNova $2.4 billion annually and cost Ashley Montgomery her entire career. Read your contracts. Every single word, every clause, every provision, every footnote that seems like legal boilerplate, especially the intellectual property sections, ownership versus licensing, development prior to employment, termination conditions. If you create something valuable, a molecule, a compound, a therapeutic that saves lives, protect it, document it, own it if at all possible. Don't assume the company will take care of you because you've been loyal for 10 years or 15 years or 19 years. Loyalty in pharma is a one-way street. It flows toward profit, toward shareholders, toward quarterly earnings, never toward the scientists who actually develop the drugs. Real power doesn't announce itself with fancy titles, corner offices, all hands presentations about transformation. Real power builds quietly, in laboratories, through molecules that work, creates value that's impossible to replace, documents everything meticulously, and when pushed too far, when disrespected beyond tolerance, acts with precision and without mercy. Ashley Montgomery learned this lesson. It cost her career, her reputation, potentially hundreds of millions in lawsuit damages, and any possibility of working in biotech again. BioNova Pharmaceuticals learned this lesson. It cost them $2.4 billion in annual revenue, 87% of their business, their entire market position, their competitive advantage, their future. Dr. Robert Shaw learned it too. He's still there, last I heard, trying to rebuild with whatever's left. Some lessons are expensive. Some lessons cost everything, Make sure you're not the one paying the tuition. Thanks for listening. Now go read your employment contract. Seriously. Today? Not tomorrow? Not next week? Today. You might be very surprised at what you unknowingly signed away.